There we go. Hey, everybody. My name is Josh Brothheim. I'm the training manager at Sumo Logic, based out of Portland, Oregon. And I'm going to be leading today's session. I have Ona Nelson assisting today. So, hey, Ona, oh, you're out there somewhere.
Hi,
Throwing you on
I'm
the
here.
spot. There you
Yeah.
are. So Ona's going to be helping out with the chat section. So if you guys have any questions throughout today, post them in the chat and either she'll answer them directly, or if we feel it's appropriate for a broader group discussion, I might, raise it. But otherwise, she's going to be your kind of communication method for today. And feel free to ask questions. That's why she's here. So let's take it, not make good use of her time, certainly. People are still coming in, and that's great. So you haven't missed anything yet. Let's go ahead and start to talk about the agenda for today. So what are we going to be talking about for the next period of time? Well, here's our agenda, and hopefully, actually, to make things even more correct, let's make sure we're at the right class. So today's is CloudSIM Fundamentals. So you might have attended another CloudSIM class. We have an administration class, but the fundamentals, as you might expect, are going to go through the fundamentals of CloudSIM, hence the name. So that's what we're here to discuss. I'm going to turn off my video just to save a little bandwidth. Okay. And as far as the agenda goes, here it is, and we'll stick to it pretty closely. So we're going to start with a review of CloudSIM Data Pipeline, what it is and what it means. And then we're going to do some labs today. We want to make this interactive. Like with our other classes, we don't want to just read slides to you for a few hours because that's not fun to anybody. So we're going to do some interactive labs. So we're going to take a look at that CloudSIM Data Pipeline, what it is, do some labs, log into the CloudSIM environment and check it out. We're going to discuss threat investigation with CloudSIM. Then going to do a lab where we start to look at insights in the CloudSIM environment. And then talk about customizing, tuning CloudSIM, and then doing some labs that bring those tools and usage to good use. So, and then we're going to also take an exam today. So we've set aside 3 hours for today. I know the schedule said 3.5. We're not going to be together that long. So we're going to be together for 3 hours and probably less than that. The first 2 hours are going to be devoted to what you see on the screen right now. So the labs, the slides, that kind of discussion of what everything is and how it works together. And then we've set aside an hour for the exam. So at the end of today, after those 2 hours, you'll take an exam. You won't need the whole hour, but it's allocated for you. And we'll discuss kind of the ground rules for that exam. I don't want you to get too stressed about it. If you've taken an exam with Sumo Logic before, it's very similar in the criteria of how it works, not the questions, of course. But so that's kind of the game plan for today. As mentioned, and for people still coming in, if you have any questions throughout today's session, go ahead and put them in the chat, and away we go. A couple of rewards for you today. So for attending today's session and getting the certification at the end of the class, so there is an end there, we want to reward you. So typically, of course, in person, we would offer some swag and some t-shirt that doesn't really fit too well, or socks that are mismatched. Well, we want to give you some food here. So once you're done with the exam later today, in about 3 hours or so, shoot an email to training@sumologic.com and go ahead and attach your certificate, and we'll send you out a $15 Uber Eats voucher. So go ahead and enjoy that. And then we also have another promotion going on for our, we called our Sumo 6. And if you pass 6 of our certifications and they're current, you can go ahead and we'll send you a free backpack. So the backpack you see right there. So if you complete those 6 certifications and they're current, you can just send us an email at training@sumologic.com as well, and we'll take you and hook you up with that backpack. So wanted to offer that. So trying to get some swag out to you, even though we can't do it in person. All right, now let's get to some actual content. All of the free stuff is probably more enjoyable at some point, but let's talk about CloudSIM, why we're here. So CloudSIM Data Pipeline, what is it? Well, what is CloudSIM first? That's probably a better place to start. CloudSIM is a cloud-based enterprise-grade security information and event management system. And that's where SIM comes from, security information and event management. So there's your acronym for the day. The CloudSIM is going to leverage Sumo Logic's core functionality, including data collection, ingestion, storage, as well as threat intelligence. CloudSIM is a purchased add-on with an ever-expanding library of content designed for security operations. Because it's designed for larger data volumes, most organizations need to ingest a large amount of data each day for insights to surface in CloudSIM. So let's take a look at this pipeline that I was referred to earlier, and let's get a visual component here. And so CloudSIM is very powerful. It's going to take millions of log messages and pull them down into a handful of actionable security insights. So going from the top left all the way to the bottom right of our pipeline here. Now there's going to be steps across this pipeline. First is going to be the collection. Logs are going to be collected and ingested by Sumo logic and turned into messages. Once those logs and data is turned into a message, the information within said message is going to be parsed, mapped, and enriched and turned into a CloudSIM record. Now, once we have a record, we're going to go ahead and compare it to rules, and that's what's happening on this third line. If a rule is triggered, an entity is extracted, a severity score is assigned, and a signal is created. And we're going to talk about all those things in much more detail. Once you have enough signals within the same entity cluster together, then they become an insight. Now for today, we're going to be focusing on the later stages of this pipeline, specifically the rules and investigation portion, so the bottom two tiers of the pipeline. If you want to learn more about the ingestion and collection, that's focused in our CloudSIM administration class. So I encourage you to take that next, not necessarily directly after this, but at some point in the future. Now, I'm going to talk about that higher level of this pipeline. Even though we're not going to focus on those first two tiers, still want to discuss them just to make sure we are comfortable with understanding how they function to some degree. As mentioned, admin goes into it much deeper, but we still want to get a basic understanding. So let's say we have a company. In this case, we're going to use Sumo Logic Coffee, which is an example we use in other classes. Sumo Logic Coffee is collecting and ingesting millions of log messages into Sumo Logic. Now, typically, you can use these messages right away in Sumo Logic apps. The data's in there, you query it, and you do what you do. But with CloudSIM Enterprise, your admin is going to need to enable data forwarding. The admin is also going to need to create log mappings, field extraction rules, or complete other pre-processing steps to extract the right data. Now, you, in the fundamentals level, will not do that. But it is a required feature in the admin class, and that's where we discussed it as well. So certainly if you want to get more advanced, administration is going to get you there. Now let's go ahead and go to that second level. Before CloudSIM can generate security insights, the log messages need to go through processing first, which I described a little bit earlier. The processing is going to have CloudSIM process the messages into records. Each record is going to contain the information from a message, which is parsed into key value pairs, which are mapped to a CloudSIM schema and enriched with other data. So here's an example of a visual kind of component to go along with that, that description. So let's follow a simple log message down this pipeline. First, we have the message that's being parsed and extracted from the record. So here we have our record, our log message, and now we're going to start to parse. Now on the left-hand side is the input, or how that data came in. It might be human readable. It may not be, but we're going to kind of not mess with it. We're going to modify it today. And what's going to happen is it's going to be mapped into a set of key value pairs. This process is going to fix the basic formatting as well. This step creates semi-structured data. So instead of having IP-127-0-0-1, the parsing step is going to extract the IP address into a key value pair where the key is source device IP, and the value is 127.0.0.1, and those hyphens have now been normalized to dots. And this information is mapped onto the CloudSIM schema. Finally, the record is going to be enriched with information from match lists or threat intelligence databases, such as its threat level. Those normalized records are then going to be sent down the CloudSIM pipeline and compared to rules. So let's continue kind of down that pipeline, if you will. Each record ingested into CloudSIM is going to be compared to hundreds of built-in and custom rules. If a rule triggers, an entity is extracted and a signal is created. If a record matches the criteria specified in a rule, then CloudSIM is going to create a signal. The severity is a number between 1 and 10 that tells CloudSIM how serious a potential threat is. When a signal is created, it's going to contain a name, an entity, a severity, a stage, and a description. A signal is always going to contain, at a minimum, an entity and a severity. The data is defined by the rule and is later used by CloudSIM's insight engine's algorithm. Now, the entity in a signal, what is that? I've alluded to that word entity. What is it referring to? Well, specifically, we're talking about in a signal, something like an IP address, a MAC address, a host name. And the entity is going to tell us who or what was involved in the event that the record described. Entities are going to be extracted from records. Every signal has an entity. The entity's activity score is the sum of all the severity scores of all the signals it appears in. And so we're going to start to look at those shortly. So that takes us down to that signal level in that pipeline. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper to the last portion, because CloudSIM is going to take everything one step further and correlate those signals into a manageable number of insights. An insight is a group of signals clustered around a single entity. So around an IP address, around a MAC address, something like that. An insight is created when the sum of the severity scores of the signals with the same entity goes above a certain activity score within a certain time frame. Now, by default, this is going to be an activity score of 12 within the last 14 days. So we're looking for the trigger by default, and we're going to use that default today, of an activity score of 12 within the last 14 days. 12 or higher, that's going to trigger an insight. So for example, if a rule was triggered with a severity of 5, and then 10 days later, another rule with the same entity and severity of 5 was triggered, the total activity score would be a 10 in the last 14 days, and an insight would not be created. If those two same rules had a severity score of 6 instead of 5, then an insight would be created, because there would be a 6 plus a 6, which gets us to 12 over 14 days. So that's how an insight is created, at least the kind of the math behind it. Once an insight is created, you can start a security investigations and take actions like alerting SOC teammates or executing playbooks. All right, so I wanted to show the interface. You're going to see this in the UI pretty soon, probably in about the next 10 minutes, but I wanted to show this screen just before we jump in to get a feel for it. So the entire data pipeline can be thought of as a funnel with your log messages going in the top and insights coming out the bottom, like we saw in that data pipeline. Log messages come in, out of the bottom, the insights. Now, so while we might ingest millions of logs, we're only going to get a few hundred signals and maybe a handful of insights. This insight radar, as you see it here in the screenshot, within the CloudSIM UI, uses this funnel shape from a top-down perspective. And as you go towards the center, there's going to be fewer items. So the outer edge of the ring, the outer edge of the ring is going to represent the records that are ingested, this dark blue. It's going to show the relative number of records in the last 24 hours. So like a clock, kind of starting at midnight and going around, we see 24 hours broken out into groupings, if you will, time slices. And the spikes that we see here, or dips, so here we see a spike, dip, here we see a spike, that's going to represent times where there were more or less records than what the average was. So we're getting a visual understanding of how many records are coming in, a lot, a little, relative to the last 24 hours. The middle circle, which is going to be this light blue with these bar graph feel, this is going to represent the signals that are being generated from those records. So each bar is going to represent the number of signals. Once again, we're taking a lot of information, distilling it down to less information. And when we get to the innermost circle, we're going to have our most distilled information, which is going to be our insights. And those are going to be things that have been correlated from the signals. And so we're going to have these triangles. And what we're going to see shortly is we're going to have hundreds, thousands of records, and it's going to be distilled down into 4, 5, 10 insights. And really can save you and your users a lot of time. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's jump into the UI at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and share a couple things here. The first is I'm going to go ahead and in the chat, I'm going to post a PDF, which is going to have the lab guide we're going to use. So let me get that. Okay, so that should be in chat now. The other thing we're going to do is once you have that lab guide, we're going to go ahead and log in together into the environment. And so here are going to be those credentials that we'll utilize for today. So go ahead and make sure you got that PDF. And at the same time, go ahead and let's log in together. So the credentials we're going to use, if you've played with us before, you might be familiar with these credentials, are going to be as such. The website is service.sumologic.com, which hopefully you're familiar with. If you're not, that's fine, of course. The username we're going to use is training plus analyst number, and we want you to select a 3-digit number. So training plus analyst 007, training plus analyst 241, 789, pick 3-digit numbers. If you use the same 3-digit numbers as somebody else, not a big deal. We have a pretty small group today. It looks like many of you have used these before, so thank you for logging in right away. And that password is SEPT2021 exclamation point. So capital SEPT 2021 exclamation point. I'm going to go ahead and log in here as well. And actually, let me log in as I'm going to log in as an equivalent user. So make sure we're on a level playing field for today, if you will. So it's going to be analyst. I'm going to pick numbers. If anybody has problems getting in, please let us know. To be transparent, it's probably going to be a typo, but not joking. Please, please let us know if you have an issue getting in. What you're getting into, let me go ahead and just clean this up a little bit, is our interface. So, you may have never been in Sumo. I hope you've been in before, but if not, this is it. This is what we're looking at. Now, what we're looking at first, and let's go ahead and start to utilize our lab guide here. And so I have my lab guide just in a separate tab. So I'm just going to keep it out of the way. I don't want to have too much on my main screen here, but we're going to go ahead and start with lab 0. And so lab 0 is logging into the system, which we're starting to do and hopefully doing successfully. Now we've logged into the Sumo Logic UI. What we want to go ahead and show you and have you do as well is go into the CloudSIM enterprise environment. So on the far left, there's going to be a black bar, hopefully. If you don't see a black bar, you might have this type of view, and you'll go ahead and just click on that hamburger icon and expand it out. And then in the black bar, go down to CloudSIM Enterprise and click on it. And what should happen is you are now in the CloudSIM Enterprise environment. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of pause for a moment just to make sure everybody's in there. Question about the credentials. The credentials that you're utilizing will be good for the rest of the month. In October, a new set of credentials will appear. I'll show you how to get those access to those new credentials when we take the exam. It's in the same environment. So, good question. So we should now be in this view. So once again, just to make sure everybody's together, we should have been in. I'm going to cheat here and just go ahead just to show you those steps again. So once again, log in, black bar, CloudSIM Enterprise, and then we get this view. So hopefully everybody's together, and if you're not, don't be shy. Oh, Graham has joined us as well. Great. So thanks, Graham. He'll be helping answer questions as well. Oops, sorry, I think I just muted you. So what do we see here? Well, we're going to talk about that in a moment. But before we do, we just want to point out on the top left here, the Sumo icon. This Sumo icon is going to return you to this page within the CloudSIM Enterprise. So as we're navigating today, if you ever get lost, just go ahead and click on that top left and you'll be brought to this screen. Now, what are we looking at? Well, let's take a look at Lab 1 and start to understand what's going on in the screen, because there's a lot going on. A lot of good stuff, but a lot going on. So what we're seeing here in the center of the screen, as advertised or just promoted a few moments ago, was or is our CloudSIM Enterprise environment, our heads-up display. We see in the center are insight radar, and we see those circles, we see the bar graph, we see those triangles, those insights, and we're going to go into those and play around with them shortly. This look and feel is kind of cool looking. I hope I'm using the term cool properly. I guess it depends who you are. In that it has a video game feel to it. If you've played video games recently, well, even fairly recently, a lot of them have a heads-up display type of interface. And this was intentionally designed for us from an individual who was involved in the design of World of Warcraft, which is a very popular online game, or was very popular. And so it's meant to have a kind of interactive feel of getting a good bunch of information kind of shoved in your face, if you will. So we see in the center that ring that we were talking about. Now on the left-hand side of the screen, we see some information, we see some stats, and these stats are going to be helpful for us. It's also going to be helpful for us with these stats to just get an understanding of how much data we're dealing with and what this thing that we're showing you, this CloudSIM, is really doing. So if you look on the top left, what we see for the last 24 hours, and feel free to play around in here, change the time periods. But for the last 24 hours, we see 636,000 records. So over the last 24 hours, 636,000 records have come into Sumo Logic, into CloudSIM. From those more than 500,000 records, we have, or the system has distilled it down to 11,000 signals. Now from those 11,000 signals, 16 insights have been created. And in that 16 insights, essentially the system is saying, of these 636,000 things that have come in, here's 16 things you should look at and decide what to do with. And that's what's being presented to us. We also get, kind of in that video game look and feel, we get insights as far as status. So things are going to start off in a new status, but as you work them, you might mark them in progress, you might close them, and so the statuses will change. For this portion of the lab 1, we want to play around with the time feature ability in here. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of do the lab together, and feel free to put your answers in the into the chat. So first question is, how many records have been ingested in the last hours? Well, we'll go ahead. We'll use our time selector here. Select last 8 hours, and we should see that the amount of records is, I guess I shouldn't reveal it, but no prizes for today, 210,000. We also see here there's been a decrease by 2%. That might be helpful to know that we're having less records ingested, or as we'll see shortly, having more insights, or more or less insights. And so this is giving us some way to evaluate what's going on and compare it to periods. How many signals have been created in the last 7 days? Take our time selector, and the question is around how many signals, but once again, just to get a better feel for the power that's going on here. In the last 7 days, the system has looked at 4 million records and found 43 things that we should look at. That's an improvement, a good use of my time. Not having to go through 4 million things manually, but getting these things distilled out of, hey, look at this. And we're going to start to look at those things in just a few moments. Finally, let's see, last one as well, just to finish up the lab 1. 1C is how many insights have been created in the last 24 hours. Once again, just play with our little time selector, and there we see also that increase, or that percentage increase, which is certainly potentially alarming, but this is a training environment, so anything can happen. Now, in the center of the screen is that HUD that we've alluded to a few times, and I want to play around with that a little bit just to get a feel for that. So as we see, there's some more questions. So as far as so if we're looking at the last 24 hours, what time were the most records ingested in the last 24 hours? And so what we're going to utilize is, for the records, we're using the blue section of the bar, of the ring, and it's refreshing, so you might periodically see it flash. And so we're looking for the highest spike. And so what we're seeing is at 4 a.m., 18,000 records were ingested, which has been the most over the last 24 hours. The fewest amount of records have been, I guess right about here, just happening right now, just a few moments ago, 3,000 records. 2B, very good point, Donna, thank you. The time might vary based on time zone, absolutely. So I'm in Pacific time zone, your spike might be at 7 a.m. depending on if you're on the East Coast or what have you. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. The last question in here, what time were the most signals created in the last 24 hours? So same idea, we use our middle ring now for signals, and we look for the spike, and there we see the amount. We also see which is kind of helpful here, we kind of refer to them as time slices, we see that these are broken out into 20-minute chunks. So here, in this 20-minute ring or point, there were 386 signals. Before that, there were 286, and that might be interesting to us. Okay, so let's go ahead and now let's go ahead and look at part 3 of this this portion of the lab. So lab 1, part 3. So in part 3, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go to the top navigation bar. So we haven't gone into these yet, but this is going to allow us to start to go to specific things we want to look at. Do we want to look at the insights? Do we want to look at the records, etc.? That gives us that control on the top. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to go to content and we're going to go to rules. So on the top bar, go ahead and click content, and then go ahead and click rules. We're going to want to remove any filter, as the lab says. There shouldn't be one, but if there is, just remove it. And what you should see is, so once again, content rules, we should see the rules that are in the system. So these are all the different rules that have been either configured or configured for us that are going to take a look at what's going on. Many of these rules, the majority of them, probably 660 of them or so, are Sumo logic rules. So Sumo logic is going to consistently add new rules, update new rules as appropriate, but you can also create your own. What we want to show here is the ability to utilize filters within, to look for these rules, to look for specific ones. So we'll go ahead and just play with the filters now a little bit. So for example, if we want to see how many rules have a name that contains firewall, we can go ahead and use our filters here. So to do the filter, we're going to click on filter, click on the field. We want to do name contains firewall. And what we should get are 11 rules. And so if we wanted to check out the firewall rules, well, now we're looking at them. Now we can also modify our filter to not just look at the name, but look at other values. Severity score might be important to us. As discussed earlier, when things go over that severity score of 12, that's an important kind of milestone. It creates an insight within 14 days. So what if you want to look at those rules and you want to see severity scores that are, in this case in the lab, greater than 8? So to use the filtering here, I'm going to get rid of my other filter in A. I don't really need it. Didn't specify, but I'm going to keep it clean. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to choose to find the filter for severity score. And then I can do greater than 8, so greater than 8. When I run it, it's going to give me 2 results. And I should see those results, well, I should see them below, of course, but then I should see those severity scores that are being displayed are above an 8 because that's what I'm requested from the system. And then finally, let's look at that 3C. We'll talk about tactics in a little bit. But if we wanted to find how many rules detect the persistence tactic, we can go ahead and we can just do persistence. Let's see, is tactic contains persistence.
Maybe one thing I would add here, Josh, while we're doing this is you may find yourself in the CloudSIM portal with all of your insights handled or assigned to someone else, hopefully. And if you find yourself in that scenario, this is when you might go into the, searching for certain signals to do almost like threat hunting. So I just wanted to include the context of, in this case, we're looking at rules. And we might also look at, rules or signals to do some threat hunting if there's no open insights to actually dive into as a security analyst.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Certainly the way we've kind of been sort of promoting is so far as looking at the heads up display, seeing what's active, but you might want to be more proactive and start to dig in here. And that's, yeah, where the filtering can be helpful. All right, let's take a look at, let's do step 4 now, which is the entities. So what we want to go in here is now, instead of content, go to entities. And these entities that are being displayed to us, remember, are going to be, almost want to say proper nouns, but they're like that in that they're going to be IP addresses, MAC addresses, host names, things like that. And so we can start to look at these entities that have been found. Once again, just go to the top, go to entities. And once again, we can also start to use our filter. So if we want to look at, once again, the activity score being, what do we have here, greater than 5, or this is greater than 5, I should do, let me try that again, because I don't think we have, I don't know if we have any entities greater than 5. Let me try that one more time. Activity score greater than 5. All right, so there's not anything in there, but that's why we're searching. So that was intentional. Let's see, how many entities have an activity score of 0? Well, all the entities we have here have a 0. And so, but we could use the filtering for that as well. All right, let's go ahead and let's go ahead and jump back into the CloudSIM HUD. So just as a reminder to get back to the home page, we'll go to the top left and click on the HUD icon. And now we'll be brought back to that heads up display. All right, let me go back to the lab guide. Excuse me, the slide deck. I think we want to go over a few more slides and then we'll jump back into the lab. So just to make sure that we're on the right track, we just did lab 1, so good. But now let's go ahead and let's get a little bit deeper. So what we're going to do now is get started with threat investigation. Sorry, jumping mouse. So in this course, we're going to use data and examples from some fictional companies like you see here on the right-hand side of the screen. So we're going to use Financial Logic, Sumo Pharma, and Sumo Coffee. Financial Logic is a major player in the banking industry. They meet all the GPD and GPDR, excuse me, GDPR, and other international compliance standards, but worry their big investors are still targets for hackers. So that's their concern, is GPDR and hacking and protecting. Sumo Pharma is a healthcare company that ships prescription meds to patients. They meet all HIPAA standards and guidelines, but they're concerned about data privacy. They want to monitor all their data to make sure their patients are safe and healthy in the digital world. Sumo Coffee is a small retail business with a big tech idea, automating the entire coffee business from bean to cup. In addition to consumer protections like PCI DSS, their main concerns include keeping computing costs down while their startup grows. So these are a couple scenarios that we may play with today. We'll actually use one of these, but just want to kind of keep these in mind of different use cases that we'll possibly get into. Now, before we do, it's kind of what Graham was alluding to earlier. Threat investigation is reactive, while threat hunting is proactive. Typically, threat investigation happens in response to an alert. Once you've investigated a threat, you can hunt for similar threats and take precautionary steps to prevent attacks from happening again. Threat investigation is an iterative scientific process, much like troubleshooting. In both threat investigation and troubleshooting, you first monitor your system. Once an anomaly is detected, you can make a hypothesis about how it happened and diagnose the problem. As you dig deeper, you may revise this initial hypothesis and find more clues about why or how the attack or error happened. As you investigate and trace the events, try to answer as many of those WH questions as you can about the event to tell the story. So who is behind the event? What assets did the event affect or impact? Where did the event occur? When did the event occur? Why did the event occur? And how did the event occur? Finally, you can then take action to resolve the issue. There are many actions you might take in response to an incident. For example, you might work with your IT team to isolate and wipe laptops that are infected with malware to prevent spread of malicious code. Or you might work with your HR team to enforce mandatory anti-phishing training among all employees to prevent future attacks. So what I want to talk about next is a day in the life of a SOC analyst. CloudSIM can help with every step of the threat investigation process, and that's what we're trying to go through today. CloudSIM is going to automatically detect and monitor potential threats by analyzing millions of records and distilling them into a handful of insights with a low false positive rate. You can choose insights from the home page of CloudSIM in the Insight Radar, under the Insight Activity pane, or from the Insights panel. Once you choose an insight, you can dig through all the raw logs and signals to conduct deep dive investigations and even proactive threat hunts. You can organize your thoughts, make hypotheses, and take notes about your investigation in the comments of each insight. This will share your ideas with your SOC teammates and help you keep track of your threat investigation. You can also take certain action, or you can always also take certain actions directly from the insight. You can email teammates, create JIRA tickets, execute playbooks, and many other custom actions within the Actions button. Finally, there we go. You can update the insight. You can mark it as in progress or closed. When you close it, you can mark it as resolved, false positive, duplicate, or no action. Updating the status correctly will help the CloudSIM Insight engine produce more accurate insights for your org in the future. Now, of course, this process will repeat each day as new insights are generated for you to investigate. I want to talk about the Mitre attack matrix, something you may be familiar with, you may not be, either way is fine, but it's something that we're going to allude to a little bit. What we're talking about here is the Mitre attack matrix. What it is, it's published by a group called Mitre. They're a nonprofit research organization. And the attack here, and it's spelled kind of funny, stands for Adversarial Tactics, Techniques, and Common Knowledge. So that's where that acronym ATT and CK, but it's pronounced attack. This framework organizes and categorizes the tactics and techniques that hacktivists, supercriminals, nation states, scripters, and other adversaries use. This includes attacks like exfiltrating databases, installing malware, stealing credentials, and all the other nefarious activities you and your SOC team are trying to stop. CloudSIM uses these same tactic names for the stages of signals and the names of insights. Once you're familiar with attack, navigating CloudSIM's Insights page becomes easier. So certainly if you are familiar with it, great, of course. If not, you'll see kind of reference throughout. I'll go ahead and just put it in the chat here, just a link to that Mitre information in case you're curious. All right, let's get back to slides, or get back to labs, just a couple more, few more slides here, and then we'll get into them. Now, let's return to our fictional companies before those labs, and specifically which Mitre attack tactics and techniques they might prioritize. So based on what we discussed earlier, financial logic, for example, they need to keep their clients' data secure. Credential access is going to be a concern, since all customers have user credentials tied to their financial accounts. So financial logic, they're concerned about credential access. Sumo Pharma is concerned about their patients' privacy and compliance with standards like HIPAA. Now, of course, credential access is important to them, but that's not their primary concern. Exfiltration of private data, that's their major concern. Sumo Logic Coffee, those individuals that are monitoring their infrastructure and make sure the apps are as efficient as possible. Of course, they're concerned about credential access and exfiltration, but execution is really their particular concern, because since many executable files utilize precious company resources, they want to make sure that execution is running smoothly. So all these organizations, of course, are concerned about security as a whole, but they do have their priorities on what they want to focus on. And that's what we're going to go ahead and utilize in a lab example in about 10 minutes or so. Now, threat investigation with CloudSIM. The Insight page is going to show you everything you need to start unraveling the security event. When signals cluster together, CloudSIM uses their tactics and techniques to name the insights they generate. The insight's name can point you to how the event occurred or why the adversary is behaving that way. For example, a tactic name like discovery or persistence, that's going to show the reasons the adversary has. Similarly, tactic names like initial access or execution can tell a little about the method the adversary used. These names are just starting points, however, and you may need to revise your hypothesis as you continue your investigation. So for example, on the screen here, an insight is named credential access. So why did the event occur? Well, probably something related to somebody bad trying to use those credentials. How did the event occur? By accessing our data. And so we're starting to get some of that insight. Now, we will also have access to see this timeline, which is going to be very helpful. The timeline is going to tell us the when, that WH question, when the event occurred. We can see whether each signal was triggered at the same time or sequentially, as well as whether everything happened over minutes, hours, or even days. By default, insights are related signals that cluster together within the last 14 days. In this example here, we see some signals occurred several days before the others, but 3 clustered closely together more recently. So on the far left of the screen, we have a signal. We have one here kind of in the middle of the screen, and then we see on the far right, a bunch of stuff happened together. And that's going to be helpful for us to understand that bunch of stuff and make it better understandable than just calling it a bunch of stuff. But timelines are going to be very valuable to get a feel of, like I said, WH, when it occurred. Now, the entities within each signal are going to point to some more of that WH, the who, the what, the where of that event. An entity might point to the IP address of a hacked device. It might point to the location of an adversary, the location of a database that leaked, the owner of a website or domain, or some other piece of the puzzle. Each insight only has one entity it's clustered around. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and take a look at some insights. So we're going to go ahead and hopefully we're still logged in. If you got timed out, I apologize for that. You might have to log back in. You shouldn't though. And now we're going to go ahead and participate in lab 2. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my lab book. And now in lab 2, you'll notice that there are a few different examples we can utilize. So what we have the ability here is to utilize our financial logic story, our Sumo Logic coffee story, or our Sumo Pharma story. I'm going to use the first one, financial logic. I'm going to show that one and use it for our lab to play around with today. Feel free to take a look at the others. We will be taking a break shortly as well. And so there'll be time for you to just kind of not mess around, play around in there. But let's go ahead and go through lab 2A together. So let me get out of my presentation. Let me get back into heads up display. And now let's go ahead and, like I said, walk through this together. So here we see that heads up display. And what we want to do is we want to go specifically to insights. So we're going to go to the top and we're going to click on insights. And now we're going to see all those insights. Now we're going to look for a specific insight here for our activity. We want to go ahead and look at the insight called persistence with initial access. And we want to find out what happened. So that's what we're going to look for. So we're going to go ahead and look for the insight name is or contains, either way, persistence with initial access. Going to go ahead and hit enter and use that filter. I'm going to see a bunch of them, and that's okay. So want to get through this list of insights. So once again, just those steps went up to insight, use the filtering, use name contains or name is, and then persistence with initial access. And then I see a variety of insights here. So I'm just going to kind of take a beat here, just make sure everyone's okay.
And that's case sensitive, right? When we're typing in this filter box at the top.
It is that a question or a statement? Because I'm not sure exactly. It is, right?
I don't think it is.
I find that if I type literal like persistence small p, it may not come up. But if you type in persistence and then choose the actual thing that results, then it will switch it to a capital P. So that's just one thing to watch out for. Is sometimes
good call. One other thing is to clear that status is not closed, because looking at the closed insight will still work for this lab.
Yeah, good. Thank you both. Absolutely. So hopefully we're looking at all these insights using, just looking at all of them. And now what we want to do is start to utilize one of the insights. So we're going to go ahead and look for one that's open, although it doesn't really matter, I guess, too much. So we're going to go ahead and look for one of these. I'm going to grab a new one. And what I'm going to see in here is information I was alluding to earlier, but now you see it within the insight. So we start to see in this, just to explain the screen here, we see this time window that we just were talking. So we see here a threat happen, and then we see some other stuff happened. And so this is starting to give us some time information. We see going down details of what was captured.
Hey, Josh, can I suggest just going back one in your browser just to show one helpful feature for a question about workflow?
Yeah, absolutely. So back to the screen.
Yeah, I think Kevin was asking about some workflow tips, and one thing I suggest, there's like a Kanban cards view in the top right. If you click the vertical, that one right there.
Oh yeah, the board, yes.
Yeah, so this is not going to tell you which one to pick on the left, but when you're thinking about what should I work on first, I might do things like use this view and then use filters or tags. So, filtering by things with higher severities, filtering by things that have been around for longer, filtering by things that are in the new column, because you know that none of your teammates have looked at those yet. So I just wanted to mention that for Kevin, one helpful workflow tip, although this isn't the holistic answer. This is just one tip I have for when you're actually in the platform working with your teammates on these insights.
Yeah, and thank you for reminding me of that card view. Ona has reminded me before, and I kind of always forget about it, but it's a much better view. It really should be probably the default view, because it does give you that feel for what's going on now, what you need to dig into. So yeah, thank you for calling that out. So let's go back into from this view, we can click an insight as well. So we're still being filtered. So we can go ahead and select one of those insights. And what we're starting to see in here is, once again, that time, and down towards the bottom, we're starting to see those events that are being correlated together. And we're starting to get potentially a picture of what has gone on. And that's what we're talking about right now, of course, getting that picture. But we start to see here that first some threat intel, a device IP matched a threat intel file hash. Then nothing happened for a long time. Not a long time, I guess 12 hours or so. Longer, probably 18 hours or so. And then what we see are some other events that have taken place. We see the events down here as well. And so we can go ahead and view them and see in chronological order what has happened as well. So what has happened? What do we kind of see going on here? So I'll go ahead and kind of pause. The lab does describe in the summary what has occurred. So don't want you to just read it directly, but we can start to get a feel for what happened. So what occurred here? So what we see is a phishing link occurred. So a user got an email that had a phishing link in it. A few moments later, after that phishing link occurred, a malicious file was allowed. So that clicker that user apparently clicked on that phishing link and downloaded whatever file was associated with that email. Then threat detection and threat intelligence rather occurred. So what happened here is that zip file that was downloaded, that malicious file, was recognized through an AV scan, and it has a known malicious file hash. Those two signals fired, and an insight was created. And so what we have is, if we add up our severity scores, we have greater than 12. And so this all combined, all this stuff going on, if you will, into an insight. And so what should occur, as the summary says, financial logic should lock the user's account and re-image the machine, and then decide, what was this whole impact. But this is how we're able to start to go ahead and see what occurred within the investigation, within the insight rather, excuse me. All right, let me go back to my slides here. So any questions about that? We didn't do the B or C. Feel free to go ahead and poke around at those. As mentioned, you'll have access to these credentials after today. But as we mentioned in that recap, in the financial logic, we saw the phishing link, we saw the potential malware, and it was all categorized together in an insight called persistence with initial access. So it was already kind of bundled and given to us of what sort of happened in here, just in the title alone. Gives us really good, I hate to use the word insight, but ability to see what's going on in there without even looking at it. Just the naming here is valuable enough. All right, let's see. Time-wise, we're doing pretty well. Let's do a couple more slides here, and then we'll probably take a break. But yeah, let's do a few more slides.
I think one thing I want to just mention out loud, I see some good questions. So enrichments and global competence. If you see enrichments, there's a link around the enrichment server. So I'll let the team, or I'll let the chat find that link and read more about what the enrichment server does. But you can basically go get more information once you have some findings. You can use the enrichment server feature to enrich those findings. And then the global confidence score is another great way to give yourself a kind of optimized workflow. So that Kanban card view and then global confidence scoring, you see on the left near this orange severity, it says global competence NA, but as you close things out, our system learns a global confidence. And so you'll probably expect that some of these will be false positives, but our system will learn what's more likely to be a false positive in your environment, which is more likely to not be a false positive. So global confidence scoring is a newer feature that will help you with deciding what to look at first. Higher confidence means, it's more likely a real threat or issue.
Cool, thanks, Graham. Anything else in the chat that is worth? I mean, I'm sure it's all worth repeating for the larger group, but just while we have you.
Yeah, I think how our severity is calculated, we'll go more in depth there. We've given some high-level answers, and then let's see what else. There's definitely some good questions. Yeah, back to workflow, the Kanban view, global competence, filtering. And then I think the learning for global competence is based on your tenant, not like data mining across all, but I'm not totally sure on that. It might be a combination of both, and I'll check what the answer is.
Cool, thanks, Graham. All right, yeah, let's go ahead and do a few more slides here. And so, as the slide says, a deeper dive into threat investigation and threat hunting. So insights are going to provide a great way for you to get that high-level summary of potential security events. Because of CloudSIM's threat intelligence and sophisticated correlation engine, very few insights are false positives, so they are all worth investigating. However, sometimes you want to dig or investigate deeper to really understand what happened. Or you might want to do proactive threat hunting work to find potential problems before they begin impacting your system, even if some of what you're looking at are false alarms. The Signals tab is going to list all the signals created by rules that have been triggered in your system in the last 14 days by default. That can be changed, but the default is 14 days. Signals provide summaries of potential security threats. Remember, not all signals are security incidents. After all, there are some legitimate reasons why somebody might be logged into 2 different accounts at the same time, or 2 different devices at the same time, or why they have several failed password attempts on an account. Just because that occurs doesn't mean it's a malicious hacker, or it doesn't, and that's where these might be false positives. When you click into a signal, you'll have the option to see the full detail of the record it triggered. This includes that information like the IP address, geolocation information, threat level, and other information that's going to help aid in your investigation. The Entities tab is going to list all the entities that your rules have detected in the last 14 days by default. Each entity has an activity score associated with it. The activity score is the sum of all the severity scores of all the unique signals associated with that entity. When an entity's activity score reaches 12 or higher, an insight is created. If you have several entities with relatively high activity scores, this might be a good starting point for a threat hunt. Now, context actions. Context actions are going to be found throughout the CloudSIM UI and are going to be useful for in-depth investigations. Many entities in the Insight, Signals, and Entity pages have context actions. You can hover next to certain entities and the 6-dot icon will appear, as you're starting to see in here, if context actions are available for that object. So as you see there, there we go, the 6 dots, and there we see those options. You can use the context actions to identify the entity into an API call, do a DNS lookup, and other tasks. Your admin can even add more or additional custom context actions. Now, using Sumo Logic Search, an in-depth threat investigation is going to use most of both CloudSIM and Sumo Logic's core tools. There's several ways to bring the information you find in CloudSIM back to the Sumo Logic platform. One context action is Sumo Logic Search. Selecting this action, once again, as you see in the image taking place here, will create a log search in Sumo Logic. This way you can find all the log messages that are associated with that entity, even if it wasn't detected by a rule in CloudSIM. And we're going to look at that in just a moment in Lab 3. We're going to go through those steps. So taking an entity and looking at it within Sumo Logic Search through the 6-dot icon. Context actions, as we call it, the more fancy name. And here's kind of a visual to go along with it. I'll let it go through because it's a pretty good visual. And then we're going to do these steps in just a few moments here. And so now we're searching for that IP address. Yeah, we really don't need to do the lab. This image is showing us. Kidding, of course, we'll do the lab, but this is a great walkthrough. All right, so finally finishing the investigation. In CloudSIM, there's going to be several different actions you can take on each insight. You can comment on the insight as you did in Lab 2, or close it, or assign a status to it, as you will do in Lab 3. When you close an insight, CloudSIM is going to use the resolution information to reduce false positives and duplicates further. Assigning a status to the insight lets you keep working on it and keeps track of your progress. You can also assign the insight to yourself or to a colleague and use the action buttons to alert colleagues, create JIRA tickets, send Slack messages, or use other APIs. This action button is customizable, but can only be configured by admin. So if you need a custom action, you're going to want to get with either an admin on your side or a Sumo admin, and they can help facilitate some of that. All right, before we jump into the next lab, I think we're just going to take a quick break now. So a little bit earlier, but I think we'll go ahead and fit in one now, and then we'll go ahead and finish the labs and come back. So let's do a quick break. Let's do a 7-minute break. Timing wise, we're doing well. So yeah, we're doing well, but let's go ahead and just take a quick one now. And if there's any questions, I'm going to throw myself on mute and step out for just a moment, go get a beverage or something. But feel free to go ahead and put those chat questions in the chat, and Graham and myself will help answer them. And Anna, excuse me, all three of us will help answer them. So thank you for joining. Let's take a little bio break, get a beverage, get a snack, and then we'll come back and finish up the labs and talk about the exam. So thank you again, everybody. And like I said, I'm just going to throw myself on mute here. Hopefully you had a nice little break. Still have 10 seconds, so don't want to shortchange you on that one. But let's see, I think there were a little discussion in the chat, but I think we're clear on questions for right now. So we're going to go ahead. Let me get rid of my timer here. And let's go back into our slide deck, but we're actually going to go into our labs here. So what we're going to do is go in straight into lab number 3. So within our lab book, we're going to go ahead and get that handy. So I'm going to pull that up. And so in lab 3, we're going to go ahead and continue our investigation. So we're going to use the same example that we used earlier, which is going to be the financial logic. We're going to go ahead and continue with the exercise. So as it says in the lab for lab 3A, we're going to go ahead and while working for financial logic, we receive an alert about an insight called persistence with initial access. We want to use a Sumo logic search to continue this investigation and then update the status of the investigation in CloudSIM. So we're going to get an alert. We want to look at the entity or portion of that alert within Sumo logic search, and then we're going to want to update that investigation in CloudSIM. So those are the pieces that we want to deal with here. And so let's go ahead and deal with them. So we're going to go back into the CloudSIM environment. Hopefully you still have it up and running. If not, log back in, but you should be still open. We're going to go ahead and go to, although we might be okay, because what we want to do is we want to get back that persistence with initial access insight. And so I still have mine open, and I hope you do too. If you don't, you remember you'll just go up to the insights and then search for persistence with initial access. But ideally, you'll get to this screen. I'm going to kind of tap, dance, or pause just for a second, just to make sure everybody's together. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to utilize the entity here. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have an IP address. So let's say in our story here, this IP address, we want to, not the story, this is this scenario, we want to go ahead and take this IP address and look for it within Sumo logic logs to see, is there anything interesting associated with this IP address? What actions maybe has this IP address been doing or what have you? So how do we take the IP address and bring it into Sumo logic search? Now we could, if we're being honest, we could copy that IP address and paste it in Sumo logic search, but that's not the seamlessness that we want to demonstrate here. What we want you to do is go to the entity. Oh, I timed out. Oh, wonderful. Great timing. Sorry about that. I was afraid that was going to happen. I could feel it. So going back into CloudSIM, Enterprise, going back into Insights, going back into, just hoping it might appear there, contains persistence with initial access. Going back, like was shown earlier, the board view is much better. We're going to go to new, and I'm going to pick one here. And then what I'm going to do is now I'm going to go ahead and go to that entity. When I hover near it, 6 dots should appear. And then I should be able to go ahead and click on those 6 dots and then use an action that I want to. Now we have a variety of different actions in here. We're not going to use all of them right now, of course, but we could add this IP to a watch list, a match list, a suppressed list. We could do a Google web search on it. We could look it up, what VODNS thinks about it, or Virus Total. Well, that's not exactly what we want to do right now. What we want to do right now is do a Sumo Logic search. So we're going to select Sumo Logic search from the pull down. And then, as might be expected, we're now searching on that IP address. So now we're in Sumo Logic, the traditional UI, and now we've searched for that IP address. And we see, for example, here we see over the last 15 minutes, this IP address has shown up 2,700 times. And this is where it has shown up. Now, just because I see this IP address, does this mean it was a malicious hacking attempt trying to, bring down our system? No, of course not. But it's certainly showing up in those logs and might be interesting.
One thing I would add here is it's not a CloudSIM feature, but log reduce is sometimes very useful to get a quick view of what is this IP doing. And
it
also,
is. And go ahead, Graham. Keep going. I'm just going to demonstrate it, but yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say also the source categories that this is showing up in. If we go to the messages tab, another way you can say what's actually happening here is you can click on the source category at the very top. Yep, right there. And I can see, okay, this is coming from my Windows boxes, my Ubuntu. So it's going to give you a quick view of like where in your environment is this IP address. And then also log reduce back on the signatures tab can say, what is the shapes or the signatures for the places where this IP address is appearing? And it's sometimes even more useful to look at the bottom of the list where the IP has only done one specific thing. So it's kind of like a quick anomaly view of the repeated signatures at the top and then the rare signatures at the bottom.
Yeah, no, thanks for pointing that out, because it is a good use case for log reduce here. So what we did is we had all of our messages, what was it, 2,700. We utilized the log reduce, and then it's going to take those, boil them down to signatures that match, and then group them together and give us a possible place that we might want to start off. And like Graham was saying, we might want to look at the ones at the bottom because those are a little more unique. Now, another thing we're going to go ahead and do in here is we're going to do a new log search. Hopefully you've done a log search in here before. If you haven't, that's fine. But assuming everyone has.
There's a couple of questions like
okay.
on chat. How do you slice the logs? And I only show one record.
Let's see. The one record
could be a time frame thing.
It could be. It should show up in there.
Yeah, if your time range is set to very low, you might only get one.
Yeah, I would say for slicing the logs, which it looks like we mean parsing. There's a lot of ways you can parse in Sumo, and one thing to notice is a lot of these fields are already parsed for you on the left side because it's JSON. So when we talk about parsing, there's an auto parsing feature for JSON. You can also right click on, for example, the source IP address field and in the actual log. So you can right click on the key name to say parse this source IP. And that will happen if you click on source IP. Yep. So you can parse this way.
Gotcha.
And then yes, you can definitely use parse regex. Parse anchor is another one where you highlight a text-based log if it's like a single line. I recommend our fundamentals course, Sumo Logic Fundamentals. And Josh, can you actually just show the home tab and then the certification just so they can see where to find all those other certifications?
Yeah, and we're going to show this later, of course, but this is where we'll get into here. But this is where we have some other courses that you can take.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this of course focuses on how to use CloudSIM, but we have a ton of other great stuff like fundamentals and search mastery for how to use the core platform once you're in that side of it.
Yep, cool. All right, let me get back out of here. And so what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and create a, where's my query? Sorry, there it is, in the lab guide. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab that query in there. And so we're gonna do a new log search. I'm gonna do new log search, paste the query in. And then go ahead and search for that. Oh, this is a, let me just correct this. This isn't a kind of an artifact of pasting from the PDF here. Let me just make sure this runs first, then I'll explain what we're doing. I just want to, I was afraid of this. Let me bump this up. Oh, I'm sorry, I wanted to put the IP address in here. That's where I'm doing this wrong. So I want to take that IP address and I want to plug it into here, into this query. And so what we're doing with this query is we're going ahead and we're looking at our security record information. We're doing a time slice and we're looking at the specific data. When we do the time slice, we're breaking our data into aggregation. Make sure it appears here. There we go. We're starting to see our data in groups of, in this case, 1 hour buckets, if you will. And so that's what this is being presented to us right now, are those essentially buckets. And so what we're now seeing is this IP address has shown up related to these two targeted associations, I guess. So the IP address has shown up in CrowdStrike, has shown up in Proofpoint. And so this might be an illustration that this is a bad IP address, unsecure, causing malicious behavior. You know, could be many things. And so that's what we want to show there. This query language, as you know, discussed by Graham, much more covered in detail in our a few different classes. Fundamentals, search mastery certainly goes over this, and so would, you know, strongly encourage you to take those and participate in those. All right, let's see, anything else in here? Oh, and then finishing the investigation. So as it says here, let's go ahead and do that portion. So let's say we did our investigation, we looked at this IP address and we find, all right, this IP address is, you know, scary, it's concerning. What do we now do with this stuff? So what we can go ahead and do is we can go ahead and finish our investigation. So we're going to go back to CloudSIM and we can go ahead and utilize these sections here. So the status, we can change it. Maybe it's in progress now because we're working on it. Maybe it, you know, something else. We can go ahead and assign it to ourselves. So maybe I want to take this, or maybe I even want to assign it to somebody else. Probably should let them know I'm assigning it to them before I do, but we could do that as well. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and close the insight. And so to close the insight, we can either, two ways to do it. We can go to the action, oh, excuse me, we can go to the status and we can mark it as closed, or we can just select close insight. And we can put a resolution, which we should. So that way we can, you know, provide somebody some information about what's going on. The system is also going to use this to learn how we close this and possibly what to do with it in the future. So putting the right resolution is going to be appropriate to make sure that, like I said, the machine kind of learns here. So is it resolved? Was it a false positive? This is all valuable information that we want to pass on. And so for today, it you know, doesn't really matter, of course, what we choose. And then we'll go ahead and close it.
And choosing that selection there is how our global competence score works. So you definitely be sure to close that out if you want the global competence score information.
Yes, so this portion that Graham was alluding to earlier is based off the calculations in there. So yeah, I want to make sure that that's correct, set correctly. All right, let's see, let's see, we were done with lab 3. Just verifying we got through it, we did. So let's go ahead, let's go back to our deck here, just once again to kind of keep us on track. And so what we saw in lab 3 was kind of the following. So we used the Sumo logic search, which was helpful to figure out, to look at that IP address. We used that index security record as part of the query to look at only that portion that was ingested by CloudSIM. So rather than looking at everything, we wanted to look at just that portion. And so we were using that as a bit of a filtering, if you will. And then we used, speaking of filters, some filters within the query itself to fine tune it and make it more appropriate to what we specifically wanted. All right. So now we're going to talk about customizing and tuning your CloudSIM environment, like the title says here. So what are CloudSIM rules? So once you've investigated, once you completed a few investigations, you may want to add or modify the rules, data sources, match lists, and other pieces of the CloudSIM puzzle. These modifications can help further reduce false positives or alert you even faster. The most common thing to customize are rules and insights. Rules are one of the most important pieces of CloudSIM's threat detection engine. There we go. All the record, sorry, where am I? There we go. Sorry, just having a little trouble with my presentation here. You can still see the CloudSIM rule stuff. Okay, good. There we go. So rules are one of the most important pieces of the CloudSIM threat detection engine. All the records that are ingested in CloudSIM are compared to every rule in CloudSIM. Remember, records are normalized log messages. If there's a match, an entity is extracted and a signal is created. These entities are tracked and may correlate with other signals to create an insight, which is where most threat investigations begin. And so that's where we get the record and the signal. Now, in regards to custom rules, you don't have to write your rules from scratch. Sumo Logic, the content team, is going to create and maintain hundreds of out-of-the-box rules to get you started. Those rules are going to be updated frequently, often every day. And you can see the most frequent updates in the announcement page within the environment. This is something we show primarily the admins, but if we go up to this help with a question mark and the announcements, we can see all those new rules that have been added. So here we see a bunch of different rules that were added recently. So this is a way for us to stay up to date on those rules. Now, sometimes you do need to write a rule from scratch. You might want to do this if your system has a source that isn't covered by the default rules, or if you're looking for a threat that isn't covered by the default rules. Custom rules aren't updated or deleted by Sumo Logic during the regular updates. They're independent from the default rules. If you do decide to create a custom rule or rule tuning expression, those rules will not be modified or deleted by Sumo's regular updates. Now, what are some of the types of custom rules that are available? Well, here are 4 of them. Match rule. This is the most simple one. It's going to take a simple Boolean statement and check if it's true or false. Then an entity will be extracted and a signal is created. For example, you might simply look whether an IP address matches on a banned list. Yes or no, true or false, very straightforward. But you can get more involved. Threshold rules. These are going to be triggered when a match is found a certain number of times. For example, if 1 failed login attempt is acceptable, but 5 isn't, then a threshold rule would fire after the 5th failed login attempt. Chain rules. These are going to fire when certain different events occur in a certain time window. For example, if you want to look for 5 failed login attempts followed by 1 successful login attempt within a 1 hour period, then a chain rule would be appropriate. Finally, there's aggregation rules. These are going to be triggered when up to 6 different events accumulate over time. For example, if you want a rule that looks for a large number of event types from a single device IP, then you would use an aggregation rule. Aggregation rules are not as common, but certainly worth telling you about. Come on, mouse. There we go. Sorry, I just having flaky mouse issues today. Now, what I'm showing here on the screen is a blank rule template in CloudSIM. So this is what it looks like. On the left-hand side, we have our if, and on the right-hand side, we have our then. And that's really what we're kind of filling in the blanks here. So when a rule is created, you need to configure the condition it matches, the if portion. It's typically going to be a short piece of code and will depend on the rule type you're creating. You can also add a rule tuning expression, which are going to be small exceptions to rules appended with an end statement. Once you've set the conditions for the rule to fire, you can configure the signal that will be created. This includes details like name, entity, description, and Mitre attack tactics and techniques you're looking for with your rule. And then one more, there we go. Finally, you also configure the rule severity score. This is going to be on a scale from 0 to 10, with 10 being the most severe. You may choose a severity of 0 if you want to monitor something, but not necessarily create insights. Higher severity scores are more likely to trigger insights. So what are some best practices when creating custom rules? First, you want to check the existing rules in your system. Sumo Logic already has built-in rules, hundreds of them, and so you may not need to write a new one. Or you may need to only make small changes to existing rules, like adding a rule tuning expression or adjusting a severity score. Next, you need to know your system well. You need to understand the schema and the log mappings of all the records that are ingested into CloudSIM to write simple, effective rules. You may want to work with an administrator on your team who knows this, so can help you write better rules. In addition to the system's details about log mappings and other data, you need to understand your company's risk tolerance, their appetite, and their priorities regarding risk. So some companies might want to monitor a large amount of outbound traffic, but not consider it a threat. They might assign the rule as a severity of 0. Another company might be alarmed by outbound traffic and consider it data exfiltration and assign the same rule as severity of 5. Both are correct, just like I said, risk appetite, risk tolerance. You want to understand all the types of rules. If your use case requires a chain rule and you're writing a threshold rule, that might not be the best experience, and you might not be as efficient or as effective as you could be. As a best practice, when you do write a new rule or edit an existing one, make small changes. For example, instead of decreasing a severity score from an 8 to a 2, try decreasing it from an 8 to a 7 and monitoring the change for a while to get a better feel for what's going on. And then finally, the last one here is the best practice around saving all new rules as a prototype. This is going to allow you to monitor the rule's behavior without creating new insights and alerts, and is highly encouraged when you create a new rule. All right, a few more slides here, and then we'll get back into those labs. So talking about rule tuning here. Adding a rule tuning expression is to an existing rule is one of the easiest and most common ways to customize your rules. A rule tuning expression is an end statement that you add to an existing rule. It's usually simple logic that you add to rules. And as a best practice, you should use rule tuning expressions when you have a small number of specific exceptions to existing rules. With rule tuning, you can modify existing rules without rewriting them from scratch. This lets you customize them without a lot of work. Once you've written a tuning expression, you can apply that tuning expression to multiple rules. You can also apply multiple tuning expressions to each rule. So they're very flexible in that regard. We're going to learn how to apply one tuning expression to multiple rules, and we're also going to learn how to apply multiple tuning expressions to one rule today in those labs shortly. When you use rule tuning instead of custom rules, your tuning expressions are retained when Sumo updates that rule. So you'll still get the advantage of the rule Sumo pushes out to all users. Now, creating insights. Once a rule is in your system, whether it's a custom rule or one that you created or one that was created by the Sumo team, CloudSIM is going to use that to create signals. If a record matches a rule, an entity is extracted from the record. The entity might be something like an IP address, a username, a domain name. It's going to tell you who the potential threat is. Once an entity is in the CloudSIM system, CloudSIM is going to track the total severity score of signals associated with each entity as an activity score. Once that activity score gets high enough, usually over 12 by default, then an insight will be created. All right, now here's a really cool visual example of insight clustering that I think you'll appreciate. So let's say we have 13 signals currently in our system from the last 2 weeks, and that's going to be represented by the different shapes on the right-hand side of the screen. So each shape on the slide is going to represent a different signal. Some of the signals are going to be entity A, those pink triangle. Those green squares are going to be entity B. Those blue circles, excuse me, are entity C. So we have our pink triangles, we have our green squares, we have our blue circles. Based on the rule that fired, each of the signals will have a severity score, which is going to be the number inside the object or the shape. Now, by default, an entity needs an activity score of 12 before an insight is created. The activity score is going to be that sum of the severity scores from the last 14 days. So, as mentioned, the pink triangles, there's 3 of them, a 5, 6, and a 7. The blue circles, severities of a 1, a 2, a 2, and a 3. And then the green squares. Those have the severity of 1, 2, 2, 3, and 4. Now, of those signals, which are going to cluster together into an insight? The blue circles, the green squares, the pink triangles, all of them, some of them, none of them. Go ahead and think about it for a moment.
You have not blue in the chat.
All right, let's see what we got here. So good to see some people are answering. So let's go through it and see what we get together. And the images are forming already. So let's go through each one. Let's go through entity A, those pink triangles. Those are going to cluster into an insight. Why or how? Well, even though there's only 3 signals there, they're relatively high severity scores. The activity score, excuse me, for entity A, those pink triangles, is an 18, 7 plus 6 plus 5. And so those cluster together into an insight. Entity B, which are our green squares towards the bottom, these are going to cluster into an insight as well. The severity scores are pretty low, 1, 2, 3s, and 4s, but there's a bunch of them. And so they add up to 12. 12 is 12, which meets our creation of an insight. Now, what about those blue circles? Well, somebody said not blue. Why did they say not blue? Why do those not cluster together into an insight? The reason is CloudSIM is still going to track them as an entity, so that's going to still occur, but they're not going to be clustered together into an insight because the activity score is 10. 10 is below 12, and so it's not an insight yet. If there was another rule with a severity score of 2 or higher that triggered with that entity, then it would cluster into an insight. And so what we want to show here is the fact that you can have a large number of low severity scores, a large number of low severity score signals that won't create an insight. You can have a small number of high severity score signals that do create an insight. And so you want to keep this in mind when you're configuring those severity scores for your custom rules. All right, 2 more slides and then we're back to the labs. Custom insights. Now, what if you do want to be alerted right away when a certain rule is triggered? Or you don't want to use that default activity score of 12? Well, that's what custom insights allows you to do. It lets you create insights based on one specific signal or a chain of signals, regardless of their severity score. This is great for known threats specific to your system. And you won't need to change any of your existing rules or insights. They're going to keep working normally. You won't have to adjust the default settings for your activity scores. So I wanted to point that out as a helpful feature of custom insights. And then finally, remember, CloudSIM's out-of-the-box rules and insights are great, but we want you to have the flexibility to customize your environment. So we've looked at 3 simple ways to customize CloudSIM's rules and insights. The first is the rule tuning expressions are going to be simple ways to add small exceptions and other clauses to existing rules. Second, custom rules are going to let you write logic that's unique to the system to cover threats or data sources that aren't covered by built-in rules. Finally, custom insights allow you to get alerts based on just one rule or a chain of rules. All right, so now let's go ahead and let's do some hands-on labs. And we're going to finish out our lab book with these next couple labs. So we're going to do lab 4, 5, and 6. And so let's go ahead and do them together. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of my slide deck. I'm going to go back into my heads-up display in CloudSIM. Hopefully it's still open. I might have to log back in. Yep, I do need to log back in. I apologize for that. In hindsight, our timeouts are a little too strict. So I'll be addressing that soon. So let me go ahead and log back in. Sept 2021. Okay, now I'm just back into Sumo Logic. Now I'm going to go back into that CloudSIM Enterprise. So back into the heads-up display. And now go ahead and look at lab 4. So in lab 4, we're going to create a rule tuning expression. And so to do so, we're going to go to the top of the screen and we're going to select content. And we're going to select rule tuning. Now here we're going to see some tuning expressions that may have been configured, possibly by somebody earlier a few minutes ago, getting ahead in the labs, which is perfectly fine, good to see. But we're going to go ahead and create one together. So we're going to select create. Now, the reason we're doing this, the lab 4 gives us that little scenario there of, let's say we're updating firewalls in our system and we don't want to trigger unnecessary alerts. So this is why we're writing the rule tuning expression, which is going to allow us to bypass firewall related rules. So there is a reason why we're doing this, and that is the reason. So we're going to go ahead and create that rule tuning expression. For the name, we're going to go ahead and, as it says here, using the naming convention of tuning expression. And then we're going to use our initials, and we're going to use the 3-digit number that we're using. And if you leave the 3-digit number out, that's fine. But I'll put your initials in there. That would help me out later. And now we're going to essentially fill in the blanks here. So we're going to tune selected rules, and we want to look for a rule type. So what we want to look for, as described, is we want to look for those firewall rules. So when I type firewall, I should see firewall stuff that matches the criteria. And we want to specifically look for the AWS network firewall alert, specifically the one that has training next to it. So we want to look for that alert and we want to select it. Now we're going to go ahead and include the portion that we're going to fill right here. So what we're going to fill out here is the portion of to only match records that match the expression. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and add ourselves as an exception. So we're going to go ahead and put this portion that's in the text of the lab and paste it into this section right here. Now we're going to modify it in a few different ways. The first thing is, by default, when we cut it from a PDF, not by default, but just typically, when we cut it from a PDF, the apostrophes get weird. So we want to delete the apostrophes and re-add them so that the text appears in red. Once again, that's just more of a cutting from a PDF thing rather than a Sumo thing. And so now we have that address in here, and then we want specifically to go ahead and put the unique number that we're using today. Now, in this case, as it says here, and you may have noticed, you may not have, either way is fine, we're using exclamation point equals. And what we're doing that for is that's going to be an is not. By using this, it's allowing us to create an exception. So we're basically saying match all the records except those that have a training plus analyst 234 in it. So rather than an equals, it's kind of the opposite of the equals, it's is not equals. Once we have that all filled out properly, we can go ahead and click submit. If we don't have it filled out properly, we're going to have an exclamation point, a triangle with an orange exclamation point right next to submit, which would tell us what we did wrong, but I don't have that, so I did good. Going to go ahead and click submit. And now I should see the rule tuning expression has been created successfully. I should also be able to go back to content and rule tuning, and I should see my rule. Oh, I need to refresh. There we go. And I see yours as well. So mine is, I don't know, wherever, somewhere in here. There's mine, there's yours, so on and so forth. So now we see those rules in there. All right, so what we're going to do now, any questions, of course, please ask. Ona and Graham have been great about answering questions in chat, so I think we're kind of good. So I'm going to keep going with the labs, and then we'll have time for a little Q&A at the end anyhow. So let's do lab 5. Lab 5 is going to create a custom match rule. So we're going to go ahead and go back into rules, content and rules, and we're going to create a new rule. So when we go into rules, as a reminder, these are all the rules that have been set up. The majority of them have been set up by Sumo Logic, another 20 probably just by our test users that have been playing around in here. But now we're going to go ahead and create the rule. Now for this match rule, what we're concerned about here is traffic coming from a particular IP address that's not covered by some of our default rules. So we want to create a match rule that's going to look for a specific IP address. And so let's go ahead and do that. We're in rules. So once again, content and rules. We're going to click create. We're going to be presented with those different types of rules that we can utilize. Do we want to do a match rule? Do we want to do a threshold rule, et cetera, et cetera? Well, for today, we want to do a match rule because we want to match an IP address, kind of a Boolean statement, true or false. So I'm going to go ahead and choose match and click create. I'm going to now need to name my rule. So once again, we want you to utilize that naming expression of match, rule, initials, and then number. And now we want to specify, well, we need to specify both the ifs and the thens. So let's go ahead and start to do so. So when a record matches this expression, well, the expression is in step 5 here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that device underscore IP and paste it in right there. Once again, I'm going to go back and modify those exclamation point parentheses there. Quotes rather, sorry. So that it shows up in red instead, just an artifact of copying from PDFs or sometimes Google Docs. And still have more to fill in, but you'll notice here that exclamation point with that 3, letting us know that there is more information required here, which is helpful. Kind of knew it already, but it's still helpful. Now what we want to do here is we want to add a tuning expression. For the tuning expression, we want to look for the one that we just created in lab 4. So we should hope it should be in, because these are in, yeah, yours should be in here. So I'm going to find mine. There's mine, JB234. So I'm adding that tuning expression. Now I have my left side done. So my if. So if the criteria matches all this, then what's going to happen? Well, now we're going to fill that out. We want to create a signal. We want to create a signal on the entity of device IP, which is going to act as our kind of our not unique identifier, but our consistent thing that we're looking at, those IP addresses. We're going to go ahead and utilize a name. So as the name is mentioned there, we're going to put signal JB234 again. The description, the summary and description, we can leave out, or I'm just going to put test just to put something in there. We're going to leave this constant severity. And now we can go ahead and play with the severity score. What severity score do we want to apply to this signal that's being created? A 0, a 10, a 5, pick something that's appropriate. In this case, this is a pretty low severity. So, if this shows up, it shouldn't be a 10. if you want to play with a 10, by all means, go ahead, but I'm going to go ahead and select, I'll select a 2. I know it's led to select a 1 in the lab, but I'm feeling a little rebellious. Then we're going to go ahead and finish up with our tags. So we're going to identify that Mitre attack framework that we want to specify here. So we're going to use tactic, and then we're going to look for the tactic of initial access. And we're just playing, so if you want to choose something else, that's fine. And then we're going to make sure that we save this rule as a prototype. That's that best practice that allows us to have the rule run and not create any insights off of it to start with. So we're going to click that, save this rule as a prototype. I don't have that exclamation here, which is a good sign. So I probably did things correctly. I'm going to click submit just to make sure. At least I have all my fields entered, and now I have created a rule. Now, once again, we can go back to content. We can go back to rules. We can refresh, and we should see our rule. Actually, we should. Well, I'll have to filter for it. I was just hoping it just popped up nice and easy at the top. But if I look for my JB234, there is my, there's my match rule. So here it is. And hopefully you see yours as well. All right, finally, we wanted to wrap things up with lab 6, which is creating a custom insight. So as kind of with the scenario, let's say you want to be alerted right away when a new custom match rule is triggered. Let's create a custom insight that's going to look for that rule and only that rule. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to content, and this time we're going to select custom insights. We did the other 2 previously, and we're done with them. So we're going to do custom insights now. It's going to show us those custom insights that may exist already. These are other individuals testing, but we want to create our own. So we're going to go click on create. And like we've been doing, essentially kind of filling in the blanks here. So for the name, we're going to call this custom insight JB234. And then we're going to configure the left and the right side, the if and the thens. So when signals are created for the following, we want to select one or more of the rules. And we should be able to find our rule in there. If you can't find yours, you can use mine. Once again, we're just kind of playing around, but you should be able to find it in there. We're going to choose the in any order here. And then we're going to fill out the right-hand side of the screen. So when this signal is matching the rule and all that, when is an insight created? Well, now we're going to configure that portion. So what is the insight going to be called? Well, we can create our own name, or we can use the one that's provided to us, which is the name that we entered at the top, which is fine for now. We can provide a description. Once again, we're just going to use test here because we're not very creative. We can choose a severity. In this case, it's going to be low, but we could certainly mark this as high if we felt it was appropriate to do so. And then we're going to specify those tags associated with the Mitre attack framework. And we're going to use that same tactic we've been using of the initial access. Once again, no orange exclamation point, which is a good sign. And so now I'm going to go ahead and click submit. It's been created successfully. But once again, I can also just go ahead and verify that by going to content, custom insights, and refreshing. And I can either search, or I could probably just scroll down and find mine in here somewhere. There's mine. Cool. There's JA. Let's see, some of the other guys out there. AS is there, etc. So seeing some of you participating, which is great. All right, so that concludes lab 6 and the labs as a whole. So let me go back to my deck. Yeah, that's kind of it. So going to open it up to questions. We still have the exam to take, and I'm going to talk about that in a few moments. But any other questions? Been many good questions so far, and like I said earlier, Ona and Graham have been answering them. So I think we're kind of up to date there. Any others that might be related to what we're talking about or not? All right, so I'm going to keep going into the exam. If there are questions, please ask. We're going to be here for a little bit, so don't be shy. We want you to get answers. So, but let's talk about the exam. Let's get that underway. So for this next portion, we're going to be talking about the assessment or the exam, as I referred to. It's going to consist of 20 plus questions, and you're going to have 60 minutes to take it. You're not going to need all 60 minutes, but you do have it allocated to you. So, if you don't rush, but you're just not going to need that much time. You need a 70 to pass it. And this is going to be an open resource exam. So like our other exams, they all are open resource. So you can utilize Sumo Logic documentation, utilize the labs that we did today, utilize a Google search if that's going to help you. And so feel free to use those resources. You have access to them in the real world. And for an exam, I think you should have them as well. And so that's why you do. So like I said, feel free to use those resources. For the exam, I'm going to go ahead and show you where it is. Did it get locked out again? Go back into this. So we're going to want to make sure that we go into Sumo Logic itself, not into the SIEM environment for this. And we're going to want to make sure that we go in or log in utilizing our personal or professional or corporate Sumo Logic account. So not training user. We don't want training analyst 754 getting credit for the exam. We want Jennifer or Bob or Bill. So make sure you log in with your, like I said, personal, professional Sumo account, which everybody should have one here. If you don't, let us know. You can sign up for a free one, but I assume everybody does. So once you're logged in to Sumo Logic, you're going to go to the certification section. Graham was pointing this out earlier. Now we're going to actually use it. So hopefully you remember, but if not, I'll show it to you. So we're going to go home, we're going to go to certification, and we're going to click Get Certified. When we do, this is going to take us into our Learn portal. One thing that's going to be shown right at the top of the screen are the credentials that are going to be used for the next month. So on October, it's on October 1st, we do it the first Monday of the month, the new credentials will come out. And so you can grab them right here. You can also just email us at training@sumologic.com for those as well. But the portion we're interested here in the Learn section here are these courses down below. And so here we have courses based on what you're interested in. Today's conversation was around CloudSIM, and so we're going to go to the very bottom and click on CloudSIM. Under CloudSIM is some self-paced content, but we have the exams, and that's what the focus is for today. So for today, we want to choose the CloudSIM Fundamentals exam. There is a CloudSIM Administration exam, and that's not meant for you. If you want to take it, of course you can, but probably encourage you to take the course with it first. So really want to stress everyone going to that fundamentals exam. Go in and click on that exam. It's going to give you some kind of information here. Register for free. As a reminder, the exam is free for you, free for your company, so no fees at this point. We're going to register for free. We're going to read this little blurb, which is basically what I just told you about the 20 questions, 60 minutes, kind of all that stuff. Just want to show you one step that's just as a reminder if you haven't taken an exam with us. So you're going to start the exam. You're going to get your questions and you're going to submit all your answers. And you're going to get your score, and hopefully better than I did. Once you get your score, it's important that you click the Submit Results button. If you don't, you won't get credit for the exam. So even if you passed and don't click Submit Results, it won't be recorded. So just weird behavior. It's not really our learning system here, but just wanted to make you aware of that. So make sure that you do click that Submit Results once you've completed the exam. Let's see what else in here. As a reminder, once you're done with the exam, go ahead and send us your certificate to training@sumologic.com. And then we're going to go ahead and send you a Uber Eats gift card. So $15 Uber Eats voucher. how many attempts do you have to take it? As many as you need. So yeah, that's the answer. The password, so you're going to want to make sure that you're using your personal Sumo Logic account. And when I say personal, one that's probably been provided to you by corporate or your employer or you signed up for. So those are the credentials you'll want to use. Let's see, that's kind of about it. So certainly feel free to start the exam. Some of you probably started before I was done talking, and that's fine as well. Oh, how do you get the bag? Let me go ahead and paste that in. So I'll put this link in, but if you don't remember the link or whatever, you can also just email us at training@sumologic.com. Let me go ahead and paste that in. All right, what else not before, but let's get you underway. So yeah, let's start the exam.
Yeah, just a few things I'm seeing in the chat.
Please, Graham.
So in terms of taking this exam, is it correct that you should log out of the training environment and then log into your company?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Make sure that you're not the training user.
Yeah.
If you're getting the if you need to change your name, that is something that your admin will have to do in your Sumo account. But if you email us, I think we can try to take care of it. No guarantees. If you're getting the missing cookie error, you may not have authenticated your email address. And so if you click that help icon, Josh, in the black bar on the bottom left, if you click help and then you go to community, there will be a link. If you've never been to community before, it'll ask you to verify your email address, and that's how you'll verify your email address. And once that email is verified, then you should be able to get into the training environment.
Yep, that's a weird anomaly for some users, sometimes using SSO, but does happen. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, both of you.
Just want to make sure, Swami, you messaged me. Are you able to log into your corporate Sumo account and then access the certification that way? If not, just let us know.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll be hanging out here monitoring the chat. There were a few people that had some questions about particular slides, Josh, so if we could go back to some of those slides. Someone wanted to see the custom rules and when they're used slide.
Custom rules and when they're used slide is this one?
That was the best practices.
This one?
This one, yeah, the rule types. There's that, but then there's also the docs, and that doc site actually has the same information but more in depth. So let me go find that. Yeah,
that's a better help article. Just more in depth.
Yeah, so here in the chat, there's the C2C rules, and you'll see examples of every rule type. And
oh, cool! You put it in perfect. Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
But if you wanted to see that slide is Josh has it up now. It's more or less the same information. This is a very condensed summary.
All right, so let's continue with the exam. Ona and I and Graham will be hanging out for a little bit. If there's other questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. But otherwise, thank you for attending. I hope you found today helpful. Good luck on the certification. Hopefully enjoy that meal on us. Another thing some people asked about, this recording as well as the slides will be uploaded to the Illuminate portal. I'll say within 24 hours. I might be pushing it a little bit, but within the next day or so. And so that way you'll be able to access everything else. All right, so I'm going to put myself on mute now, and thank you again. Thank you everybody for joining, and best of luck, and hope to see you at another training. You guys had great questions, so certainly made it interesting for me. So thank you again, everybody.
Hey, Josh, can you go back to the slide that shows how to find where to click on and then go into the taking the certification? Yeah, so again, what you need to do is make sure you log out of your current sandbox training account and then log into your corporate account. So wherever you'd log into Sumo to do your day-to-day work in Sumo, log into your actual company Sumo account. And then if you see on this screen here, you're going to go to the home and then certification tab. That's how you get to the certification.